The massive station floated in the darkness of space, its metal surface reflecting the light of distant stars. Inside the Grand Assembly Hall, representatives from 847 different alien species sat in their designated seats. The air was filled with tension as they prepared to vote on the most controversial issue in galactic history. Admiral Jiwan stood on the bridge of her ship, watching the proceedings through a holographic display. Her uniform was crisp and pressed, but her face showed the exhaustion of someone who had been fighting a losing battle for months. Next to her stood Minho, her chief science officer, and Hyeri, the diplomatic liaison. All three of them knew what was coming. The Corvian ambassador rose from his seat. His crystalline body sparkled under the hall's lights as he began to speak. His voice echoed through the chamber, translated into hundreds of languages simultaneously. He listed the charges against humanity one by one. Unauthorized colonization of 47 star systems. Refusal to follow galactic resource laws. Development of weapons that broke council regulations. And worst of all, spreading dangerous ideas about freedom and democracy to species that served under the council's member empires. Humanity is too aggressive, the Corvian declared. Too independent? Too chaotic. They do not fit into our ordered civilization. For the safety and stability of the galaxy, we must act. The vote was called. The numbers appeared on the giant display screen. 672 species voted in favor of exile. 143 voted against. 32 abstained. The decision was final. Earth and all human colonies were expelled from galactic civilization. All trade would stop immediately. All human ships had 1 year to leave council space or face military action back on Earth. President Sunwoo received the news in her office in Seoul. She sat quietly for a moment, processing the information. Then she stood and walked to the window, looking out at the city below. Millions of people went about their daily lives, unaware that their entire civilization had just been cast out from the galactic community. She called an emergency meeting of the United Earth Assembly. Representatives from every nation gathered in the Great Chamber. When everyone was seated, President Sunwoo stepped up to the podium. Her voice was calm and steady as she delivered the news. "The Galactic Council has voted to exile us," she said. "They believe this is a punishment. They think cutting us off will make us weaker. They think we will beg them to take us back." She paused, and a slight smile crossed her face. "They have forgotten what humanity does best. We survive. We adapt. We build something new from nothing." Director Hajun of the Colonial Fleet stepped forward to present what he called the Phoenix Protocol. It was a plan that Earth's Strategic Defense Council had been developing in secret for decades, just in case something like this happened. The plan was simple in concept but massive in scale. Humanity would not hide. They would not disappear. Instead, they would relocate every human colony, every space station, every outpost to a new region of space. The target was the Galactic Rim, an area that the Council considered worthless. It was filled with dense nebulae that made navigation difficult. The star systems were unstable. Space anomalies made it dangerous to travel through. No Council species wanted anything to do with that region, but human scientists had discovered something the Council had never bothered to look for. Dr. Yunji from the Lunar Research Institute had been studying the rim regions for years. Her team had found deposits of exotic matter that could make faster-than-light travel much more efficient. What the Council thought was worthless territory was actually incredibly valuable. The Assembly voted to approve the Phoenix Protocol. Within days, the greatest mass migration in human history began. Captain Ting commanded the first wave of colony ships, heading toward the rim. His flotilla consisted of 2,000 vessels carrying 12 million colonists. They also carried fabrication equipment, genetic archives, and digital copies of every book, song, movie, and piece of knowledge humanity had ever created. If they were being exiled, they would take everything that made them human with them. As the flotilla approached the border of Council space, sensors detected several alien ships moving to intercept them. Commander Yuna, leading the escort carriers, identified them as Drexian patrol vessels. The Drexians were one of the more aggressive council species. Known for enforcing regulations with brutal efficiency, the Drexian commander sent a message demanding that the colony ships stop for inspection. He cited violations of the new embargo and threatened to use force if they did not comply. Una sent back a simple response. "We are leaving as ordered. Do not interfere." The Drexian ships opened fire. Plasma bolts streaked across space toward the human vessels. Una did not hesitate. She launched every fighter she had and activated the escort fleet's new defensive systems. What followed was a brief but intense battle. Human fighters moved in coordinated swarms, overwhelming the Drexian targeting systems. Electronic warfare specialists jammed their communications and sensors. Kamikaze drones loaded with explosives penetrated their shields and struck critical systems. The Drexians had expected an easy target. Instead, they found themselves fighting an enemy that used tactics they had never encountered before. Within 20 minutes, 3 Drexian cruisers were crippled and the rest were retreating. The human flotilla continued on its way without a single colony ship lost. News of the battle spread quickly through council space. The message was clear. Humanity was leaving, but they would not be bullied or pushed around. Over the next 12 months, the exodus continued. Every human colony was evacuated. Space stations were either moved or abandoned. Outposts were packed up and relocated. 50 billion people left council space and headed for the REM territories. It was the largest migration in galactic history. The council watched with mixed feelings. Some were relieved to see humanity go. Others felt uneasy. A few even expressed regret, though none were willing to reverse the vote. Admiral Jiwan was on one of the last ships to leave. She stood on the bridge of the Indomitable, watching as the border of council space disappeared behind them. Ahead lay the unknown, the dangerous rim regions that no species had seriously tried to colonize. Minho stood next to her, running calculations on his datapad. "The first colony sites are reporting successful landings," he said. "Initial surveys confirm the exotic matter deposits. We have everything we need to start building." Jiwan nodded. She thought about all the humans who had left behind homes and lives in council space. She thought about the uncertainty ahead. But she also felt something unexpected: hope. "They exiled us because they feared what we might become," she said quietly. "Let's prove them right." 20 years had passed since the Great Exodus. The Rim territories had changed completely. What was once considered worthless space was now home to 500 thriving human worlds. Fleet Admiral Woodgen stood on the observation deck of his flagship, the Horizon's Edge, looking out at the Terminus sector. Massive shipyards floated in orbit around 3 different planets, each one the size of Earth's moon. Ships of all sizes moved between them, some under construction, others being refitted or repaired. Dr. Soman arrived on the observation deck to deliver her report. She was excited, almost unable to contain herself as she explained her team's latest breakthrough. They had developed a way to create artificial gravity wells that could stabilize the chaotic nebula regions. Star systems that were previously too dangerous to approach could now be colonized safely. "This changes everything," Woodgen said, studying the data she had brought. "How many new systems does this open up?" "At least 200, Soman replied. "Maybe more. We're still surveying." Down in the engineering section, Daeyun was working on something equally revolutionary. He had been designing a new generation of starships, taking advantage of the fact that humans no longer had to follow council regulations about acceptable technology. The new ships incorporated quantum processors that made their computers thousands of times faster. They had self-repairing hull systems that used nanotechnology to fix damage automatically. And they were armed with weapons that would have gotten any council species arrested for possessing them. But the most surprising development was not technological. It was political. Refugees had started arriving at human borders. These were members of client species who served under the Council's member empires. They were fleeing oppression, seeking freedom and better lives. President Jesu had established what she called the Open Door Doctrine. Any being who came seeking asylum would be welcomed, no questions asked. At first, the numbers were small, a few dozen ships per month. But as word spread, the trickle became a flood. Within 10 years, 87 different alien species lived under human protection. They brought their own knowledge, skills, and cultures. Some were brilliant scientists. Others were skilled craftsmen. Many were simply ordinary people looking for a chance to live without fear. The integration was not always smooth. Different species had different needs, different customs, different ways of thinking, but humans had learned something from their own bloody history. Diversity could be a strength if managed with respect and understanding. Meanwhile, back in Council space, problems were growing. Ambassador Borum of the Centauri Trade Confederation sat in her private office, reviewing economic reports. The numbers were bad and getting worse. Trade routes that used to run through human colonies now required long detours that cost time and money. Technologies that humans had been developing were no longer available. Entire industries were struggling. She made a decision that could cost her career if discovered. She contacted Pioneer's Gate, a human border station, and requested a secret meeting. Diplomatic officer Sung-ho met her in a private room. He listened as she explained the Centauri's situation. They were suffering economically without access to human markets. They needed to resume trade, but the council would see it as treason. Sung-ho leaned back in his chair, considering. "We can arrange trade through intermediaries," he said. "Ships with no obvious connection to either of our governments. But we need something in return. What do you want?" Borum asked. "Information. Tell us what the council is doing. What they're planning. What they're saying about us behind closed doors." Borum hesitated only a moment before agreeing. She needed this trade deal too badly to refuse. This pattern repeated itself over the next few years. One by one, council species began making secret deals with humanity. The official embargo remained in place, but a massive black market had developed. Ships with false registries carried goods between human and council space. Both sides pretended not to notice. Krathkar, the council's intelligence director, was a reptilian being known for his strategic mind. He had been watching these developments with growing alarm. He compiled all the data into a report and presented it to the council leadership. The numbers were damning. Human territory had grown by 300% in 2 decades. Human technology was advancing at a rate that violated all their predictive models. 17 council species were now in regular contact with human agents. Refugee flows from council space to human space continued to increase. "We have made a terrible mistake," Krathkar told the assembled leaders. "We thought exile would weaken them. Instead, we removed the only leverage we had over them. They are now free to do whatever they want, and they are growing stronger every year." The council members listened in uncomfortable silence. None of them wanted to admit the truth. They had been wrong. Far from council space, in the depths of the Veil Nebula, research scientist Nari was having the most important day of her career. Her survey team had been mapping the nebula for months when they detected something unusual. Artificial structures, clearly made by intelligent beings. Clearly very old. When they approached to investigate, they found an entire network of ancient facilities. The structures were inactive but still intact. Inside, they discovered data archives. The information was encoded in a format that took weeks to crack, but linguist Jiho finally managed to translate it. What they learned changed everything. The galaxy had been through cycles before. A civilization would rise to dominance, establish order, maintain stability for thousands of years, and then collapse. The pattern had repeated at least 4 times. The cause was something the ancient builders called the harvesters. Entities that emerged from dark space every 50,000 years to consume advanced civilizations. They were drawn to high concentrations of technology and population. They were unstoppable by conventional means, according to the archive's calculations. The next harvest was due in less than 30 years. Nari brought this information back to the Rim Council. The debate was intense and emotional. Should they warn the Galactic Council? The same council that had exiled them? Commander Yunwoo argued passionately against it. Let them face it alone. They threw us out. Why should we save them? Others agreed with him. The wounds of exile were still fresh. Many humans still felt anger toward the council, but President Jisoo listened to all sides and then made her decision. We warn them. Because it's the right thing to do. Because we're better than they are. And because if the council falls, we're next. A human delegation traveled to the Galactic Council bearing evidence of the harvester threat. They presented sensor data, translated archives, and mathematical models showing when and where the harvesters would arrive. The response was not what they hoped for. The Corvian ambassador stood and denounced the presentation as propaganda. This is obviously a lie, he declared. A transparent attempt to end your exile by manufacturing a crisis? Other council members agreed. Some thought it was a human trick. Others simply could not believe such a threat was real. The evidence was dismissed. The warnings were ignored that the human delegation returned home in frustration. Admiral Woojin watched them arrive and asked what happened. When they told him, he shook his head. They're going to die, he said quietly. And they'll take half the galaxy with them. President Jisoo called another meeting. If the council won't prepare, then we prepare alone. Start military production. Recall all survey ships. Begin fortifying our border systems. She paused. And pray we're ready in time. Fleet Marshal Taejun walked through the massive shipyard, his boots echoing on the metal floor. All around him, workers and robots were building ships at a pace never seen before. Every construction facility in human space had converted to wartime production. He stopped at the observation window to watch a new vessel being assembled. It was enormous, 3 kilometers from bow to stern. Bristling with weapons and armor, Chief Engineer Yarn stood beside him, pride evident in her voice as she explained the capabilities of the new Titan-class dreadnoughts. They had rail guns that could fire projectiles at 90% of light speed, plasma lances that could cut through any known shielding, and the most controversial weapons of all, the Nova bombs that used the same fusion reactions that powered stars. How many can we build before they arrive? Taejun asked. 50, maybe 60 if we push production, Yaron replied. It won't be enough to match the Council's fleet in numbers, but each one of these is worth 10 of their capital ships. Taejun nodded. He knew that hardware alone would not win this war. He had been working with General Kyung-soo to develop a new combat doctrine. They called it asymmetric warfare. If humanity could not match the enemy in numbers, they would fight smarter instead. Kyung-soo had studied every war in human history, from ancient battles to modern conflicts. He had identified patterns and tactics that worked when facing a superior force. Swarm attacks that overwhelmed enemy defenses. Guerrilla raids that struck quickly and disappeared. Electronic warfare that blinded enemy sensors. Psychological operations that damaged enemy morale. Every trick humanity had learned in thousands of years of fighting each other would now be used against the harvesters, while the military prepared for war. Ambassador Seo-jin was working on a different kind of preparation. She traveled to the margins of Council space, to the regions where species existed that the Council had marginalized, exploited, or threatened. She was building alliances. The Krell were her first success. They were a warrior race that the Council had confined to a small reservation zone after crushing their empire centuries ago. They had not forgotten or forgiven. When Seo-jin offered them a chance to fight alongside humanity against a common enemy, their commander Thrakenel brought 500 warships and thousands of ground troops without hesitation. The Luminari were different. They were energy beings without physical form, persecuted by the Council for their religious beliefs. They could not fight in conventional ways, but they had a unique ability. They could interface directly with computer systems, merge with the electronics, and control them. For electronic warfare, they were perfect. The Valen were a hive mind species that the Council had exploited for labor. Individual Valens were not very intelligent, but when connected in their hive network, they could coordinate complex actions with perfect precision. For fleet operations, this made them incredibly valuable. Within 5 years, Seo-jin had assembled a coalition of 23 species. All of them shared one thing. They were tired of council tyranny. They saw humanity as offering something different. Not domination, but partnership. Captain Minji was given the difficult task of turning this diverse group into a unified fighting force. She commanded the Joint Species Fleet exercises in the Obsidian sector. The problems were immediate and obvious. Different technologies that did not work together. Different tactics based on different military traditions. Different cultures that misunderstood each other. The Krell wanted to charge directly at the enemy. The Luminari preferred stealth and infiltration. The Valen needed constant communication to maintain coordination. Human doctrine emphasized flexibility and adaptation. Making all of these approaches work together seemed impossible. Minji spent months on the problem. She organized joint training missions where species had to work together to complete objectives. She held cultural exchange programs so they could understand each other better. She developed a common tactical language that everyone could use. Slowly, painfully, the coalition began to function as a real military force. Meanwhile, Scout Commander Dongmin was patrolling the extreme edge of the galactic rim when his sensors detected something unusual. Gravitational anomalies, distortions in space-time, energy signatures that matched nothing in any database. He transmitted the data back to headquarters immediately. Scientist Arium analyzed it for 2 days straight without sleeping. When she finally had her answer, she called an emergency meeting with Admiral Wujin. "They're coming," she said simply. "The harvesters." These readings match the descriptions in the ancient archives exactly. "And they're bigger than the records suggested." Wujin studied the projections. The anomalies were moving toward council space at sublight speeds, but they were accelerating. "How long do we have?" 18 months. Maybe 20 at the outside. Humanity made one final attempt to warn the council. President Jesu personally delivered a message via quantum communication. She presented irrefutable sensor data, showed them the calculations, explained exactly what was coming and when. This time they listened. The data was too compelling to ignore. But their response was not gratitude. It was panic mixed with arrogance. The council declared a galactic state of emergency. Then they sent a demand to humanity. Share all defensive technologies immediately. Provide complete strategic plans. Place all human forces under council command. In return, they would temporarily suspend the exile during the crisis. President Jesu read the message twice to make sure she understood it correctly. They wanted everything humanity had developed, but they were offering nothing meaningful in return. Temporary suspension of exile? That was not a gift. That was an insult. Her reply was cold and precise. "We are not your subjects anymore. We are a sovereign power with our own allies and interests. If you want our help, you will negotiate with us as equals, not as supplicants." The council refused. Their pride would not allow them to negotiate with humans as equals. Instead, they began their own military preparations. Decades too late. With no real understanding of what they were facing, Admiral Wujin received reports on council military movements. He watched as they concentrated their fleets in traditional defensive formations. Ship-to-ship formations. Battle lines that stretched across entire star systems. Exactly the kind of conventional warfare that would be useless against the harvesters. "They're going to be slaughtered," he told his staff. "They'll fight this like every other war they've ever known. Formation against formation. Firepower against firepower. But the harvesters don't fight that way." General Kyungsu agreed. "We need to prepare for 2 wars. One against the harvesters, and one to save the council from their own stupidity." The coalition forces continued their preparations. More ships were built. More weapons were stockpiled. More training exercises were run. They established fallback positions, supply caches, and communication networks. Everything that could be prepared was prepared, but everyone knew the truth. They were about to face an enemy that had destroyed civilizations far more advanced than theirs. An enemy that had been perfecting their harvesting methods for millions of years. an enemy that showed no mercy and accepted no surrender. In the quiet moments, when the officers were alone, many of them wondered if they would survive what was coming. Captain Taeyang stood on the bridge of his ship, looking at the stars, thinking about his family back on one of the colony worlds. Commander Yuna wrote letters to her children, just in case she did not come back. Engineer Dae-yun double-checked every system on every ship, knowing that small details might mean the difference between life and death. The countdown continued. 18 months. 12 months. 6 months. The gravitational anomalies grew stronger. The energy signatures grew clearer. And then, exactly when the projections said they would, the harvesters arrived at the edge of council space. The war had begun. The harvester fleet emerged from dark space like a nightmare made real. Their ships were massive organic vessels that looked like they had been grown rather than built. The smallest ones were the size of cities. The largest were the size of moons. They did not send messages. They did not issue warnings. They simply began their work. Vox Prime was a Drexian colony with 12 billion inhabitants. It was a prosperous world with gleaming cities and advanced technology. The harvesters arrived in orbit and deployed thousands of smaller craft. These descended on the planet like insects swarming over food. The Drexians fought back with everything they had. Planetary defense systems fired missiles and energy beams. Military bases launched fighters. Ground forces prepared to resist invasion. But the harvester craft were not there to invade. They were there to harvest. Within 72 hours, Vox Prime was dead. Every building had been stripped down to its component materials. Every resource had been extracted. Every living thing had been consumed for biological matter. What remained was a barren rock, scoured clean of everything that made it a world. The harvesters moved to the next system. The Galactic Council called an emergency session. For the first time in their history, they acted with unity and speed. A combined armada of 10,000 ships was assembled and dispatched to intercept the harvester fleet. It was the largest military force ever gathered in galactic history. Observer Jungi watched from the stealth ship Phantom as the two fleets met at the Calyx Belt. The Council fleet was impressive. Ships from dozens of different species, all coordinated under a unified command. Their formation was textbook perfect. Battle lines arranged for maximum firepower. Fighter screens deployed to protect the capital ships. Support vessels ready to provide logistics. The battle began with a massive barrage. Thousands of weapons fired simultaneously. Space lit up with explosions and energy beams. For a moment, it looked like the Council might actually win. Then the harvesters responded. Their weapons did not work like conventional arms. Some projectiles passed through shields as if they were not there. Others phased through armor and exploded inside ships. Energy beams that hit harvester vessels seemed to be absorbed rather than doing damage. And any damage that was inflicted healed within minutes as the organic hull tissue regenerated. The Council fleet's perfect formations became death traps. Ships bunched together were hit by weapons that spread between them. The fighter screens were swept away by harvester drones that outnumbered them 100 to 1. Support vessels trying to maintain the formation became easy targets. Jungi recorded everything, his hands shaking as he watched the slaughter. In 6 hours of combat, the Council lost 3,000 ships. The harvesters lost 7. The survivors retreated in disorder, their formation broken, their morale shattered. The galaxy finally understood what they were facing. This was not a war that could be won with conventional tactics. This was an existential threat that required something different. 3 days after the battle, a Council delegation arrived at the human border. The Corvian ambassador was with them, the same being who had championed humanity's exile 20 years before. Now he was here to beg for help. Fleet Admiral Wujin and President Jisu met them in a conference room on Pioneer's Gate. The atmosphere was tense. The Council delegates looked exhausted and frightened. They had seen the future, and it was their extinction. The Corvian spoke first. We were wrong about humanity. We admit it. The exile was a mistake. We need your help. We will give you anything you ask. Territory, resources, technology. Just help us survive this. President Jesu listened without expression. When he was finished, she presented humanity's terms. Full autonomy for all human allied species. Permanent seats on the Council for Humanity and the Coalition. Complete technological sharing between all parties. Unified military command under human strategic direction. And most importantly, complete restructuring of galactic governance after the war to prevent future tyranny. The Council delegates looked at each other. Some were willing to accept immediately. Others balked at the last condition. Restructuring governance meant giving up power. It meant admitting that their system had failed. You want us to change everything we are, one delegate said. Our entire civilization. Yes, Jesu replied calmly. Because your civilization created the conditions that made this crisis possible. Species fighting each other instead of working together. Resources wasted on maintaining dominance instead of advancing technology. Talent suppressed instead of encouraged. Your system is broken. If we survive this war, we will build something better. The delegation asked for time to discuss among themselves. Jesu stood to leave. You have 12 hours to decide. After that, we defend our territory and our allies? The rest of the galaxy can fend for itself. It was a bluff. Humanity would fight regardless. They had to. If the harvesters consumed council space, human space would be next. But this was their leverage to force real change. 11 hours later, the council accepted the terms. The war would be fought under human command with the goal of creating a new galactic order when it was over. Supreme, Commander Taejun assumed command of the unified forces. His first orders shocked many council officers. He abandoned all traditional defensive strategies. No more static battle lines. No more fighting to hold territory. Instead, the combined fleet would operate as mobile strike forces, hitting the harvesters where they were weak and retreating before they could respond. The harvesters had a pattern. They moved methodically from system to system, harvesting everything before moving on. This made them predictable. Taejun exploited this. Human forces would strike their supply lines, disrupt their coordination, force them to spread out their forces. Classic guerrilla warfare adapted for space combat. Captain Taeyang led the first major operation. His strike force penetrated deep into harvester-occupied territory, using the nebulae for cover. Their target was a harvester hive ship, one of the massive command vessels that coordinated harvester operations. The weapons they carried were experimental, designed by Dr. Soman specifically to fight the harvesters. They were quantum disruptors that destabilized the exotic matter the harvesters used for power. When detonated inside a hive ship, the effect cascaded through its entire energy system. The insertion was successful. The strike team fought through harvester drones, took casualties, but reached their objective. The quantum disruptors were deployed and activated. Taeyang and his team barely made it back to their ship before the explosion. The hive ship tore itself apart from within. The detonation destroyed 50 harvester vessels that had been connected to it. For the first time since the war began, humanity achieved a major victory. The battle recordings were shared across the fleet. Morale improved dramatically. The harvesters could be beaten. The weapons worked. There was hope, but the cost was terrible. Every operation meant casualties. Ships were lost. Crews died. Commander Yuna sacrificed her carrier to cover a retreat, staying behind to hold off harvester pursuers while the rest of the fleet escaped. She took 3 harvester cruisers with her, but she did not survive. Colonel Yunwoo died defending a colony world. He held a critical position for 18 hours, giving time for civilians to evacuate. When his ammunition ran out, he detonated his base's power core, taking the surrounding harvester forces with him. The names of the fallen grew longer every day. Memorials were held. Letters were written to families. But the war continued. There was no choice but to continue. Slowly, the tide began to turn. The harvesters were being pushed back. Not defeated, but contained. Their advance had stopped. For every system they harvested, the coalition retook 2 others. The war became a grinding calculation of losses and gains. Admiral Wujin studied the strategic map in his command center. After 3 years of continuous warfare, the front lines had stabilized. The Harvesters controlled about 30% of Council space. The Coalition held the rest and was gradually taking back lost territory, but intelligence reports indicated something concerning. The Harvesters were concentrating their forces around a single location deep in space, a massive construct that served as their staging point and production center. As long as that existed, the Harvesters could continue the war indefinitely. Wujin called his senior officers together. We need to destroy that construct. It's the only way to end this war permanently. Fleet Marshal Taejun stood in the war room surrounded by holographic displays showing the Harvester construct. It was enormous, larger than any structure ever built by any known species. Streams of data flowed across the screens as analysts tried to identify weaknesses in its defenses. The plan was called Operation Terminus. Every available ship, every trained warrior, every weapon system would be committed to one final assault. If they succeeded, the war would end. If they failed, the coalition would be broken and the Harvesters would eventually consume the entire galaxy. Taejun looked at the assembled commanders. Representatives from 100 different species, all preparing to risk everything on this one desperate gamble. Admiral Jiwan would lead the assault fleet personally, commanding from the dreadnought Indomitable. Captain Minji would coordinate the fighter wings. Engineer Daeyun would serve as Chief Damage Control Officer aboard the flagship. The casualties will be massive, Taejun told them bluntly. Many of you will not come back. But if we succeed, we save billions of lives. Maybe trillions. That is why we fight. The fleet assembled in the Horizon sector. 50,000 warships from every species in the coalition. It was the largest military force ever gathered, surpassing even the Council's failed attempt at the Calyx Belt, but this time they were fighting with human tactics and human determination. The journey to the construct took 3 days at maximum speed. When they arrived, the Harvester defenses were exactly as bad as predicted. Weapons platforms covered every approach. Automated defense fleets numbering in the thousands. Spatial anomalies that could tear ships apart. If they strayed from safe corridors, the battle began with a massive coordinated strike. Human and coalition forces hit the defenses from multiple directions simultaneously. The idea was to overwhelm their response systems, create gaps in the coverage, allow strike teams to penetrate deeper. Admiral Jiwan watched from the Indomitable's bridge as the battle developed. Explosions lit up space like fireworks. Ships died by the hundreds. But slowly, the coalition forces were advancing. Captain Minji led her fighter wings in suicidal runs against the weapons platforms. They flew through fields of defensive fire that vaporized half of them. But the survivors reached their targets and destroyed critical systems. Each platform that fell opened a wider path for the capital ships. Engineer Daeyun worked frantically in the damage control center as the Indomitable took hit after hit. Hull breaches multiplied. Power conduits failed. Entire sections depressurized. But Daeyun and his team performed miracles, keeping the ship functional when by all rights it should have been destroyed. The coalition fleet pushed deeper. The casualties were staggering, exactly as predicted. But they were making progress. The outer defenses were falling. Scientist Nari was aboard one of the science vessels, analyzing the construct in real time as the battle raged. She had been studying Harvester technology for 3 years, looking for weaknesses. Now, under extreme pressure, she found one. The entire construct was powered by a singularity core, a contained black hole that provided nearly infinite energy. It was the source of their power, but it was also a vulnerability. If the containment field was disrupted, the singularity would become unstable. The resulting explosion would tear the construct apart, but reaching the core required flying into the heart of the structure through defenses that had already destroyed hundreds of ships. It was effectively a suicide mission. General Kyung-soo volunteered without hesitation. He loaded the most powerful Nova bomb in the human arsenal into a small stealth ship. Then he said goodbye to his staff and launched toward the construct. The flight into the construct's interior was the longest 20 minutes of his life. Defensive systems targeted him constantly. He dodged, weaved, used every trick he knew. His ship took damage. Systems failed. But he kept going. He reached the singularity chamber. The containment field was visible, a shimmer of energy around a point of absolute darkness. Kyung-soo armed the Nova bomb and set it for maximum yield. Then he sent one final transmission: "Tell humanity we won." He flew directly into the containment field and detonated the bomb. The explosion was catastrophic. The singularity lost containment and began consuming everything around it. The construct started tearing itself apart, massive sections breaking away and being pulled into the black hole. The Harvester fleet, suddenly without coordination or command, fell into chaos. Admiral Ji-won saw the opportunity immediately. "All ships, press the attack. Do not let them regroup." The coalition fleet surged forward. They hit the disorganized Harvester forces from every direction. Ships that had been nearly invincible when properly coordinated were now vulnerable. One by one, they were destroyed. Within hours, the Harvester presence in the galaxy was broken. Some ships escaped into dark space, fleeing beyond any possible pursuit. But the threat was ended. The war was over. The victory celebration on Arcturus Prime was massive but bittersweet. Billions had died. Entire species had been nearly wiped out. The economic cost would take generations to recover from. But they had survived. That was what mattered. President Jisoo, now in her 70s but still sharp, convened the first meeting of the reformed Galactic Council. The new structure was fundamentally different from the old one. No species would have permanent dominance. Old decisions required broad agreement. Client species were liberated and given full representation. Technology development was encouraged rather than restricted. Ambassador Seojin presented the Covenant of Free Worlds, a constitution ensuring rights and autonomy for all member species. The document had been drafted by representatives from 50 different civilizations, incorporating ideas from each. When the vote was called, it passed with overwhelming support. The Corvian ambassador stood to speak. He looked older, tired, humbled by war and loss. "I must apologize," he said. "For the exile, for not listening to your warnings, for underestimating humanity. You saved us when you had every reason to let us die. That is something we will never forget." President Jisoo accepted his words with grace. "The exile was hard for us, but in some ways it made us stronger. You forced us to stand on our own. You forced us to build something new. Perhaps it needed to happen." She paused. "But now we move forward together. Not as master and subject, but as equals." 50 years after the war, historian Ji-woo compiled a comprehensive account of the entire conflict. She traveled to hundreds of worlds, interviewed thousands of survivors, and studied countless records. What emerged was a detailed picture of how humanity had turned exile into triumph. The statistics were impressive. Human colonies now numbered 2,000 worlds. Human technology led the galaxy in multiple fields. Human ideas about freedom and governance had reshaped galactic civilization. The Rim territories, once considered worthless, were now the most prosperous region in known space, but Ji-woo knew the numbers did not tell the whole story. She visited the memorial on Earth, a beautiful garden world dedicated to remembering those who had died. The names of the fallen were carved into walls that stretched for kilometers. Commander Yuna, Colonel Youngwoo, General Kyung-soo. Millions of others. Ji-woo placed flowers at Kyung-soo's name. The inscription below it read, "They told us we didn't belong among the stars. We proved them wrong by saving them." As she stood there, a ship passed overhead. One of the new exploration vessels, heading beyond the galactic rim into truly unknown space. Humanity's next chapter was beginning. On the bridge of the Deep Space Explorer Wanderer, Captain Seung-min reviewed the data from their long-range probes. Scientist Yuri confirmed what the readings suggested. There were other galaxies beyond this one, entire regions of space that no one had ever explored. Seung-min smiled. Humanity had spent centuries confined to one planet, then decades restricted by galactic politics, then years fighting for survival. Now, for the first time, they were truly free to explore without limits. He turned to his crew. Set course for the Andromeda Galaxy? Let's see what's out there. The Wanderer engaged its quantum drive and vanished into the darkness between galaxies. Humanity was moving forward again, driven by the same curiosity and determination that had always defined them. The story of Earth's exile had become the foundation of humanity's greatest age, an age where they did not just survive among the stars but thrived, an age where they led not through domination but through example, an age built on the belief that any challenge could be overcome with courage, creativity, and the refusal to give up. The Galactic Council had voted to exile Earth, believing it would diminish humanity and solve their problems. Instead, they had freed humanity to become something greater than they ever could have been under Council restrictions. Humanity had not waited to be asked twice. They had taken exile and transformed it into opportunity. They had turned isolation into strength. They had faced extinction and emerged victorious. The galaxy tried to exile humanity. Humanity inherited the galaxy instead. And across countless worlds, in hundreds of languages, people told the story to their children. The story of how humans refused to be broken. The story of how the unwanted became the essential. The story of how the exiled became the saviors. It was a story that would be told for thousands of years. A reminder that sometimes the greatest achievements come not from acceptance but from rejection. Not from following the established path, but from forging a new one. The galaxy would never be the same. And humanity was just getting started.